They say grief is love with nowhere to go. But mine was rage waiting for a target, standing in the rain clutching muddy lilies. I watched water blur the name on the headstone. My phone buzzed, on the security feed. A moving truck backed into my driveway while my father-in-law pointed at the second-floor window, my dead daughter's room. He was not just moving furniture, he was declaring an invasion. My name is Taylor Valen, and for the last 365 days, I have existed in a state of suspended animation, a ghost haunting my own life. They tell you that the first anniversary is the hardest, that the body keeps score of the trauma even when the mind tries to forget. But standing here in the relentless Boston rain, I did not feel the healing passage of time. I felt only the raw, serrated edge of a wound that refused to close. I stood before the twin granite headstones, the gray stone darkening as the downpour intensified. The water ran in rivulets over the engraved letters of their names. Liam Valen, Mia Sterling, my husband and his sister, my entire world, buried 6 feet beneath the sodden earth of this historic cemetery. I adjusted my grip on the black umbrella, but it was useless against the wind whipping off the harbor. The cold seeped through my wool coat, settling into my bones, a physical manifestation of the emptiness inside me. I was 32 years old, a successful landscape architect capable of redesigning entire city blocks. Yet I could not redesign the architecture of my own grief. It was supposed to be a quiet moment. I had planned to spend an hour here, just talking to them, telling Liam that I had finally managed to sleep through the night once last week, telling Mia that I had almost picked up a paintbrush again. I wanted silence. I wanted the dignity of memory. But the world of the living has no respect for the dead. The vibration in my pocket was jarring, a buzzing insect against my hip. I ignored it at first. I wanted to ignore it, but it persisted, a rhythmic demand for attention. I pulled my phone out, shielding the screen from the rain with my hand. It was a notification from my home security system. Motion detected, front yard, driveway. I frowned. It was 2 p.m. on a Tuesday. The house should have been empty. I had explicitly canceled the cleaning service for the week, wanting to be alone in my morning. I tapped the notification, and the live feed loaded, the small circle spinning for a second before the image resolved. The breath left my lungs in a sharp, painful hiss. I was not looking at a delivery driver dropping off a package. I was not looking at a stray dog. I was looking at a massive, white-moving truck backing into my driveway, its tires crushing the hydrangeas I had planted with Liam 3 springs ago, and standing there, directing the chaos like a conductor of an orchestra from hell, was a man I recognized by the cut of his suit and the arrogance of his posture. Conrad Sterling, my father-in-law. He was pointing a finger toward the second floor, toward the bay window that looked out over the ocean, toward Mia's room. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. No, he could not be doing this. Not today, not ever, but especially not today. That room had been sealed since the funeral. It was a time capsule, a sanctuary where the smell of Mia's oil paints and her lavender perfume still lingered in the air. I had locked it because I could not bear to see her absence, but I also could not bear to change a single thing. I watched on the tiny screen as 2 men in blue jumpsuits emerged from the front door carrying a white armchair, Mia's reading chair, the one she curled up in to sketch. They were carrying it out into the rain. "No," I whispered, the sound lost in the wind. Then I screamed, "No!" I scrambled toward my car, slipping on the wet grass, mud splattering the hem of my coat. I threw the umbrella into the back seat and slammed the door, my hands shaking so violently I dropped the keys twice before I could jam them into the ignition. The engine roared to life, and I peeled out of the cemetery parking lot, ignoring the speed limit signs. The drive back to the house was a blur of gray asphalt and red taillights. The windshield wipers slapped back and forth, a metronome counting down the seconds to a disaster. My mind raced through scenarios, trying to find a logical explanation, but deep down, I knew there was no logic here. This was power. This was dominance. This was the Sterling way. I took the corners too fast, the tires hydroplaning slightly before gripping the road again. I did not care. I needed to get there. I needed to stop them. Every mile felt like a marathon. When I finally turned onto my street, the sight that greeted me was worse than the grainy footage on my phone had suggested. My driveway was a staging ground for destruction. The rain was coming down harder now, a deluge that soaked everything in seconds. And there, sitting on the wet pavement, were the contents of my dead sister-in-law's life, her easel, her collection of vintage records, the velvet ottoman she loved. They were getting ruined. The water was darkening the fabric, warping the wood. I screeched the car to a halt, blocking the exit of the moving truck, and threw the door open. I did not bother with a coat or an umbrella. I marched into the storm, the rain plastering my hair to my face instantly. "Stop!" I screamed, my voice raw. "Put it back! Don't you dare touch another thing!" The movers hesitated, looking at each other. They were holding a stack of sketchbooks wrapped in plastic. Thank God for the plastic. But they paused on the ramp. Conrad Sterling turned slowly. He was standing under the shelter of the front porch overhang, dry and immaculate in a charcoal three-piece suit that probably cost more than the movers made in a year. He looked at me not with sympathy, not with shared grief, but with a look of mild annoyance, as if I were an unruly employee interrupting a board meeting. "You're making a scene, Taylor," Conrad said, his voice projecting effortlessly over the sound of the rain. "Get inside before you catch pneumonia. I don't have time to take you to the hospital today." "What are you doing?" I demanded, stalking up the steps to face him. I was shivering, but it wasn't from the cold. It was pure, white-hot rage. "This is my house. These are Mia's things. You have no right to be here. Who let you in?" Conrad checked his watch, a gold Patek Philippe that glinted in the gray light. "I have a key, Taylor. Or did you forget that my son paid for the locks on this house? And as for what I am doing, I am managing assets, something you seem incapable of doing in your emotional state." He gestured vaguely at the pile of furniture soaking in the driveway. "That room is a mausoleum," he said, his tone dismissive. "It's been a year. It's gloomy. It's depressing. And quite frankly, it's a waste of prime square footage. We need the space ready." "Ready for what?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Mia lived there. She died. Conrad, your daughter died. Doesn't that mean anything to you?" He stiffened slightly, his jaw tightening, but his eyes remained cold. "It means I have to move forward. Unlike you, I don't wallow. I build. And we are clearing this room to create a nursery." "A nursery?" I stepped back, blinking the rain out of my eyes. "What are you talking about?" Before he could answer, the front door opened again, but it wasn't the movers this time. It was Preston, my brother-in-law, and his wife, Bianca. Preston looked down at his shoes, unable to meet my gaze. He wore a cashmere sweater and looked soft. Useless, a pale imitation of the man Liam had been. But Bianca looked like she was walking on a runway. She was dressed in a tight beige knit dress that accentuated the curve of her pregnancy, her hair perfectly blown out, her makeup flawless despite the humidity. She held a take-out coffee cup as if she were inspecting a hotel room she wasn't quite satisfied with. "Oh, Taylor," Bianca said, her voice dripping with faux sweetness. She stepped out onto the porch, one hand resting protectively, performatively, on her baby bump. "You're home early. We thought we'd have this all done as a surprise before you got back." "A surprise?" I choked out. "You broke into my house." "We didn't break in," Bianca said, rolling her eyes. "Dad has a key, and honestly, we're doing you a favor. That room smelled like old paint and sadness. It's terrible for feng shui." She looked past me, pointing a manicured finger at the movers. "Careful with that rug. We might sell that one." "Get out," I said, the volume of my voice dropping to a dangerous low. "All of you, get out of my house right now." Conrad stepped between me and Bianca, his chest puffed out. "Calm down. Bianca is carrying the future of the Sterling family. the first male heir. He deserves the best room in the house, the one with the ocean view. Preston's condo is too small, and we are renovating the main estate. They will be staying here for the foreseeable future." I stared at him, unable to comprehend the audacity. "They are not staying here. This is my house. My name is on the deed. And my son's money is in the walls," Conrad snapped, his mask of civility slipping for a fraction of a second. "Liam poured hundreds of thousands of dollars into this place. You think I don't know that? You think you just get to keep everything while my family gets nothing?" "Liam was my husband," I yelled. "Everything he had is mine. That is how the law works." "We'll see about the law," Conrad muttered. I pushed past him, rushing into the house. The hallway was muddy. Wet footprints tracked all over the hardwood floors I had restored by hand. I ran up the stairs, my heart pounding in my ears. The door to Mia's room was wide open. I stopped in the doorway, gasping for air. It was gutted. The bed was stripped. The curtains were torn down. The walls, which Mia had painted a soft, periwinkle blue, were already being prepped with blue painter's tape. But what broke me was the lock. I saw the splintered wood around the door frame. They hadn't just used a key. The interior deadbolt, the one I had installed specifically to keep people like Conrad out, had been kicked in. "You forced the door," I whispered. Preston appeared behind me at the top of the stairs, looking miserable. "Taylor, look, Dad said it was okay. He said you weren't using the room and that you were unstable. We just need a place for a few months until the baby comes." "You broke the lock," I said, turning to face him. "Mia's sketches, her journals, where are they?" "They're in boxes," Preston mumbled. "We're putting them in storage." "Storage?" I laughed, a hysterical, jagged sound. "You mean the garbage?" "Don't be dramatic," Bianca said, ascending the stairs slowly, making a show of her burden. "We kept the valuable stuff. The junk is in the truck. Honestly, Taylor, you should thank us. You've been living in a shrine. It's creepy. You need to move on. Maybe meet someone new. Although," she looked me up and down, sneering at my wet, muddy clothes, "you might want to shower first." I turned back to the room, watching the movers lift the last major piece. It was the large easel in the corner, but resting on it was not a blank canvas. It was the last painting Mia had ever finished, a portrait of Liam and me on our wedding day, but done in her abstract, dreamlike style. It was full of light and color, capturing the way Liam looked at me better than any photograph ever could. It was the most precious thing I owned. "Careful!" I yelled, lunging forward. "Do not touch that!" The mover, startled by my shout, jerked his head. His grip slipped on the polished wood of the easel. It happened in slow motion. I saw the easel tip. I saw the canvas slide. I saw the frame hit the corner of the heavy oak dresser they had dragged into the center of the room. There was a sickening crunch. The painting didn't just fall. It impaled itself on the corner of the dresser. The canvas tore right down the middle, ripping through Liam's face, ripping through the smile Mia had spent weeks perfecting. The frame snapped with a loud crack, wood splintering onto the floor. Silence descended on the room. Even the rain outside seemed to hold its breath. I fell to my knees, crawling toward the wreckage. I reached out, my fingers trembling as I touched the torn canvas. It was destroyed, irreparably, violently destroyed. It felt like I was touching a corpse. "Oh, oops," Bianca said from the doorway. Her voice lacked even a singular ounce of regret. "Well, it was kind of amateurish anyway. We can buy you a print to replace it, something from a real gallery." Something inside me snapped. It wasn't a thought. It was a physical sensation, like a cable parting under too much tension. The grief that had been drowning me for a year suddenly evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. I stood up. I didn't wipe the mud from my knees. I didn't wipe the rain from my face. I turned to face them. Conrad had come up the stairs now, standing behind his son and daughter-in-law, surveying the damage with zero emotion. "Get out," I said. My voice wasn't loud anymore. It was dead calm. "Get out before I kill you." Bianca gasped, clutching her pearls. Did you hear that, Conrad? She threatened me. She threatened the baby. I heard it, Conrad said, stepping forward, his presence filling the hallway. He looked at the broken painting, then at me, and let out a short, derisive sigh. You are hysterical, Taylor, Conrad said, adjusting his cufflinks. And this behavior is exactly why I had to intervene. You are clearly not capable of managing this property or yourself. I am calling the police, I said, reaching for my pocket. Trespassing, destruction of property, breaking and entering. Conrad laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. Go ahead. Call them. The police commissioner is coming to dinner at my estate on Saturday. Who do you think they will listen to? The hysterical widow, or the man who pays for their annual charity ball? He took a step closer to me, invading my personal space, smelling of expensive cologne and old money. You need to learn your place, Taylor, he said, his voice dropping to a low growl that only I could hear. This house was bought with sterling money, my son's money. You think because your name is on a piece of paper that you own it? You own nothing. You are nothing without Liam. He gestured around the hallway. This house serves the living now. It serves my grandson, not your ghosts. You have two choices. You can let Preston and Bianca move in, and maybe I will let you stay in the guest room if you behave, or... He smiled, a shark baring its teeth. Or my lawyer will have a courier deliver a lawsuit to your doorstep by 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. We have records. Taylor, we can prove Liam paid for the renovations, the down payment assistance, the maintenance. We can prove equitable interest. I will tie you up in court for 5 years. I will drain every penny you have until you are begging to sell this place to me for $1 just to make it stop. He leaned in, whispering into my ear. So, be a good girl, go dry off, and make us some tea. We have a lot of furniture to arrange. The command hung in the humid air of the hallway, suspended there like a guillotine blade waiting to drop. It was a sentence so steeped in misogyny and entitlement that it actually had a grounding effect on me. My vision, which had been tunneling with rage, suddenly snapped back into a wide, panoramic clarity. I looked at Conrad Sterling, the man who treated the world as his personal chessboard, and I felt something shift inside my chest. It was the heavy iron door of my grief slamming shut, and the steel gate of my resolve sliding open. I did not move toward the kitchen. I did not move toward the guest room. I planted my feet firmly on the hardwood flooring that I had sanded and stained with my own 2 hands long before I ever signed a marriage license with his son. No, I said. The word was simple, but it landed with the weight of a sledgehammer. Conrad blinked, his eyebrows knitting together in genuine confusion. He was not used to that word. In the Sterling Empire, people did not say no to him. They scrambled. They apologized. They acquiesced. Excuse me? He asked, tilting his head. I said no, I repeated, my voice steady, devoid of the hysteria he so desperately wanted to pin on me. I will not make you tea. I will not dry off. And you will not be moving a single piece of furniture into this house. In fact, if you are not off my property in 5 minutes, I am pressing charges. This is my son's house, Conrad spat, the veneer of civility beginning to crack. I have rights here. Let us be very clear about something. Conrad, I said, stepping closer to him, ignoring the way Preston flinched and Bianca clutched her fake pearls. Because your memory seems to be failing you. My mind flashed back, cutting through the red haze of the present to a memory from 5 years ago. It was a crisp autumn day, long before the rain and the funerals. I was standing in this very foyer, but the walls were peeling beige wallpaper then, and the air smelled of stale tobacco from the previous owner. I was 27 years old. I was holding a bottle of cheap champagne and a deed with my name and only my name printed on it. I bought this house 5 years ago, I told Conrad, keeping my eyes locked on his. I bought it 2 years before I even met Liam, and I did not buy it with sterling money. I bought it with the check I earned from the Emerald Ribbon Project. The memory was vivid. The city of Boston had held a blind competition to redesign the waterfront greenway. It was a massive contract, one that firm partners twice my age killed for. But I won it. My design, which focused on sustainable drainage and native flora, had won. The payout was significant. It was the proudest moment of my professional life. I took every single penny of that commission and bought this dilapidated Victorian by the sea. I wanted a project. I wanted roots. I wanted something that was entirely, undeniably mine. Liam moved in with me, I said, my voice rising slightly, fueled by the injustice of his claim. He moved into my house. He slept in my bed. He ate at my table. He did not buy me, and he certainly did not buy this house. I looked at Preston, who was still staring at the floor, unable to witness the castration of his father's ego. Liam was nothing like you, I said to Conrad, but I was looking at Preston. Liam was a healer. He spent 12 hours a day fixing the hearts of children born with defects. He came home with blood on his scrubs and exhaustion in his eyes, and he never once asked about stock prices or mergers. He loved that I was independent. He loved that I didn't need his money. That was the truth that Conrad could never swallow. Liam, his golden boy, his eldest son, had rejected the cutthroat world of sterling shipping to become a pediatric cardiothoracic surgeon. Liam had gentle hands. He had a soft laugh. He was the anomaly in a genetic line of predators. And then there was Mia. My eyes darted to the empty space on the wall where her painting had hung just moments ago. Mia Sterling, the baby of the family, the disappointment. According to Conrad, she had refused to marry the son of a senator. She had refused to get a business degree. She wanted to paint. She wanted to feel. Mia was the only one of you who was welcome here, I said, my voice cracking just a fraction. She came here to escape you. Conrad, she slept in that room upstairs because it was the only place in Boston where she wasn't told she was a failure. She was my sister. In every way that matters. She was my sister. The silence that followed was heavy with the ghosts of the past year. 365 days ago, the company retreated. I was supposed to go. I had the flu, a violent, feverish stomach bug that kept me bedridden. Liam hadn't wanted to go without me, but Conrad had insisted. It is the annual shareholder gala aboard the Sterling Pride. He had barked over the phone. It looks bad if my son is not there. So Liam went, and Mia went, mostly to keep Liam company. The official report said it was a freak accident, a boiler explosion in the engine room of the super yacht, a structural failure that caused the vessel to take on water faster than the pumps could handle. 12 people died that night in the freezing Atlantic waters. My husband and my sister-in-law were among them. But I had seen the preliminary maintenance logs before they mysteriously disappeared from the public record. I knew that Conrad had cut the budget for fleet maintenance by 30% that quarter. I knew he had switched to a cheaper, uncertified vendor for engine repairs. He had gambled with safety to save a fraction of a penny on the dollar. And he had paid for it with his children's lives. And yet, here he stood, breathing, while they rotted in the ground. "You killed them," I whispered. It wasn't part of my plan to say it, but the words tumbled out. "You and your cheap maintenance contracts." Conrad's face turned a shade of purple I had never seen before. "How dare you?" he hissed. "That was a tragedy, an act of God." "It was negligence," I shouted. "Stop it!" Bianca shrieked, stepping forward and shielding her belly as if my words were physical projectiles. "You are upsetting the baby. How can you be so selfish? We are talking about the future of this family, and you are digging up the past to hurt us. Look at you. You're unhinged." She turned to Preston, grabbing his arm with a manicured claw. "Preston, tell her! Tell her we have rights!" Preston looked up, his eyes watery and weak. He looked so much like Liam in the jawline, but there was nothing of Liam's spirit behind those eyes. "Taylor," he mumbled, his voice trembling. Dad says Liam paid for the renovations, the roof, the HVAC system. It adds up. It creates equity." Conrad regained his composure, smoothing his jacket. He latched onto this argument like a lifeline. Exactly, Conrad said, his voice regaining that oily, legalistic confidence. Liam spent over $150,000 on this property in the last 2 years. A slate roof, a high-efficiency geothermal heating system, custom windows, under Massachusetts law. Those contributions create a marital interest in the property. Since Liam died without a specific will excluding this asset, and since the estate is still in probate, the Sterling family holds a significant equitable claim to this house. He stepped forward, invading my personal space again. My lawyers estimate our share is roughly 40% of the current market value. Conrad said, "Now, I am a reasonable man. I am willing to let you live here, in the guest quarters, while Preston and Bianca raise my grandson in the main suite. It keeps the asset in the family. It is a generous offer. Taylor, far more generous than you deserve." I stared at him, incredulous. He was trying to steal my house by itemizing acts of love. Liam had insisted on the new roof because he knew I worried about leaks during the winter storms. He had installed the heating system because he wanted me to be warm. He did those things because he was my husband, not because he was an investor looking for a return on capital. "You are twisting his kindness into a transaction," I said, disgust curling in my stomach. "You are disgusting." "I am a businessman," Conrad corrected, "and right now, you are a liability." Bianca chimed in, wiping a fake tear from her cheek. "Taylor, please, think of the baby. He needs a stable home, a home with history. Why do you want to keep all this space to yourself? It's so lonely. We would bring life back to this place." She looked around the foyer, her eyes calculating the value of the chandelier. "Besides," she added, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "you can't possibly afford the upkeep on this place alone anymore. Not without Liam's salary. We're doing you a favor." That broke it. The insinuation that I was a charity case, that I was helpless without a man to pay my bills. "Get out," I said. I walked to the front door and threw it open. The rain was still pouring, a gray curtain against the world. "I am not asking you again," I said, pointing to the driveway where their truck was still idling. "Get out of my house. Take your movers, take your truck, and take your entitlement back to your mansion. If you are not off my property in 2 minutes, I will call the police and I will report a trespassing in progress. And don't think I won't do it. Conrad, I would love to see the headline. CEO of Sterling Shipping arrested for harassing widowed daughter-in-law." Conrad stared at me. He weighed the threat. He knew I had contacts in the city government from my design days. He knew a public arrest would tank his stock price, which was already wobbling after the accident investigation. He sneered, a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. "Fine," he spat. "We're leaving." He signaled to the movers with a sharp wave of his hand. "Pack it up. We are done here for today." Preston looked relieved. He hurried past me without a word, head ducked low against the rain. Bianca glared at me, clutching her coat tight around her baby bump. "You will regret this," she hissed as she passed. "You're going to die alone in this big, empty house, and you'll deserve it." I slammed the door behind her, but Conrad caught it with his hand before it could latch. He stood on the threshold, the rain spotting his expensive Italian wool suit. He didn't look defeated. He looked like a man who had just decided to stop playing with his food and start eating. He reached into his inner jacket pocket and pulled out a thick manila envelope. He tossed it onto the entryway table. It landed with a heavy thud, sliding across the polished wood. "You think you're the victim here, Taylor," Conrad said, his voice low and devoid of any human warmth. "You think you're the grieving widow fighting the big bad wolf, but we both know the truth about you and Liam." I frowned, my hand gripping the door handle. "What are you talking about?" "Read it," he said, nodding at the file. "Read it, and then tell me if you still want to go to war, because if you force my hand, I won't just take the house. I will sue you for fraud. I will destroy your reputation. I will make sure everyone in Boston knows exactly how you used my son." "I loved him," I said. "Did you?" Conrad smiled, and it was the coldest thing I had ever seen. "The numbers suggest otherwise." He turned and walked into the rain, stepping into his black limousine without looking back. I slammed the door and locked it. I threw the deadbolt. Then I engaged the security chain. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it might crack a bone. The house was silent again, save for the drumming of the rain on the roof Liam had paid for. I stared at the envelope on the table. It was thick, ominous. I shouldn't open it. I knew it was poison. I knew it was a fabrication designed to gaslight me. But the seed of doubt, once planted by a master manipulator like Conrad, is a vigorous weed. My hands were shaking as I reached for it. I tore open the seal. The dossier lay open on my dining room table like a dissected corpse. It was not merely a collection of papers. It was a forensic accounting of my marriage. Stripped of all romance and reduced to a cold, hard ledger of debits and credits. I sat there for hours, the tea in my mug turning cold, staring at the rows of numbers. Conrad had been thorough, terrifyingly thorough. The document was titled Statement of Equitable Contributions, a legalistic euphemism for a hit list. Page 1 listed the slate roof installation, $42,000. Page 2 detailed the geothermal heating system, $38,000. Page 3 was a comprehensive list of maintenance fees, landscaping upgrades, and even the new windows we had installed to protect against the nor'easters. At the bottom of the final page, bold and circled in red ink, was a figure that made my stomach churn. Conrad had tallied every cent Liam had ever spent on our home, adjusted it for inflation, added a projected appreciation value, and concluded that the Sterling family now owned 40% of my property. 40%. It was an arbitrary number, a fiction created by expensive lawyers, but seeing it in black and white made it feel like a prison sentence. Conrad was rewriting history. He was turning Liam's acts of care into investment capital. Liam hadn't fixed the roof because he was building equity. He fixed it because he didn't want water dripping on my head while I slept. But in Conrad's world, love did not exist. Only leverage existed. My phone rang. Shattering the silence, I flinched, spilling a drop of cold tea onto the mahogany table. The caller ID showed a name I recognized, an aunt from the Sterling side of the family. A woman who had hugged me at the funeral and told me I was brave. I answered, hoping for a voice of reason. Taylor, darling. Her voice was syrupy, laced with a poisonous kind of concern. I heard about the unpleasantness yesterday. Conrad is quite distressed. He broke into my house. Eleanor, I said, my voice hoarse. He destroyed Mia's painting. Oh, let's not be dramatic, she clucked, as if I were a toddler throwing a tantrum over a spilled juice box. Conrad is just thinking of the family legacy. That house is so big for just one person, don't you think? It's selfish to hoard all that space when Preston and Bianca are expecting. You really should be reasonable. We all want what is best for you, and fighting Conrad is not best for you. Did he tell you to call me? I asked. He merely mentioned he was worried about your mental state, she replied. We all are. You know, grief can make people irrational. Perhaps it is time to let go of the house and move on. There are lovely condos in the city, smaller, more manageable for a widow. I hung up. My hand was shaking. 10 minutes later, the phone rang again, then a text message from a cousin, then an email from a family friend. The message was identical in every instance. Be reasonable. Don't fight the family. You are being selfish. It was a coordinated assault. Conrad had activated the network. He was isolating me, painting me as the hysterical, ungrateful outsider who was stealing from the generous Sterling dynasty. I turned off my phone, but the silence that followed was even louder. I felt the walls of my own house closing in on me. The sanctuary I had built with Liam suddenly felt like a fortress under siege. I made the mistake of opening my laptop. I needed to check my bank accounts, to see if I had enough liquidity to hire a defense attorney. But my finger hovered over the social media icon. I knew I shouldn't look. I knew it would be poison, but I clicked. Bianca had posted an hour ago. The photo was high definition, filtered to perfection. It showed Bianca standing in front of my front door, her hand resting lovingly on her baby bump, looking wistfully at the garden I had designed. The caption read, "Nesting mode activated, preparing the perfect home for our little prince. Even if there are obstacles trying to block our happiness, family is worth fighting for. Hashtag Sterling Heir, hashtag New Beginnings, hashtag Love Wins." It was vague enough to be plausible deniability, but specific enough to be a dog whistle. The comments section was a bloodbath. "Who is the obstacle? Is it the aunt?" asked one user. "Some people are so bitter they can't stand to see others happy," wrote another. "Don't let anyone stop you. Mama Bear, take what belongs to your baby." I scrolled, feeling bile rise in my throat. Then I saw a comment from a burner account. "I heard the sister-in-law is a gold digger who trapped the older brother and is now squatting in the family estate." Bianca had liked the comment. I slammed the laptop shut, my breath coming in short, shallow gasps. This was not just a legal battle. It was a character assassination. They were rewriting my identity. I was no longer Taylor Valen, the successful architect who bought her own home. I was Taylor the leech, the squatter, the bitter widow. The doorbell rang. I froze. I was not expecting anyone. I walked to the window and peered through the blinds. A silver sedan was parked in the driveway. Right behind my car, a man in a cheap blue suit was standing on my porch, holding a clipboard and a laser measuring device. I opened the door a crack, keeping the security chain engaged. "Can I help you?" I asked. The man smiled, a practiced, shark-like expression. "Good afternoon. Mrs. Valen, I'm Gary Vance, from Vance Realty. Mr. Sterling sent me over to do a preliminary valuation of the property." "Mr. Sterling doesn't own this property," I said, my voice trembling with rage. "I do." Of course, Gary said, dismissively. "But given the pending litigation regarding the equitable interest, we need to establish a baseline market value. It's just standard procedure. If you could just let me in to measure the square footage of the master suite, it would save us both a lot of time." "Get off my porch," I said. "Mrs. Valen, please." He sighed, looking at his watch. "If I don't do it today, the court will just order an appraisal next week. You're delaying the inevitable, and honestly, looking at the exterior maintenance," he glanced at a patch of ivy I hadn't trimmed in months, "the value might be lower than Conrad hopes. You might want to sell before the market dips." "I am not selling!" I screamed, and I slammed the door in his face. I leaned my back against the wood, sliding down until I hit the floor. I buried my face in my hands. They were everywhere. They were at my door, on my phone, on my computer. There was nowhere to hide. The doubt started to creep in then. It was a cold, insidious whisper in the back of my mind. Maybe they are right. Maybe I am being unreasonable. I looked at the dossier again. $150,000. Liam had spent so much. Had I taken advantage of him? I remembered him insisting on paying for the roof. I had offered to split it, hadn't I? Or had I just accepted it? My memory felt fuzzy, distorted by the grief and the gaslighting. Had I been a burden? Was I just a charity case he had taken in? "No," a voice inside me said. "That is what they want you to think." I forced myself to stand up. I needed a lawyer, a real one, not the family attorney Liam and I had used for our wills, who was undoubtedly in Conrad's pocket. I drove into the city, the rain finally letting up, leaving behind a gray, oppressive humidity. I went to the office of Sarah Jenkins, a fierce litigator I had worked with on a zoning dispute years ago. She was tough. She didn't care about old money. Or so I thought. Sarah listened to my story in silence, her face unreadable. She looked at the dossier Conrad had given me. She looked at the thread of the lawsuit. "Taylor," she said, taking off her glasses and rubbing the bridge of her nose. "I like you. You know I do. But this is Conrad Sterling." "So?" I asked. "The law is the law. The deed is in my name. In Boston, the Sterlings are the law," she said quietly. "Conrad has judges on his payroll. He has the zoning board in his pocket. If he claims equitable interest, he can tie this house up in probate for years. He can freeze your assets. He can make it so you can't even sell a window without his permission. So what do? I asked, feeling the desperation clawing at my throat. Do I just give up? Do I let them win? Sarah sighed. If I were you, I would negotiate a buyout, get him to pay you for the 60% you own, and walk away. Start fresh somewhere else, somewhere the name Sterling doesn't open every door. It's not about the money, I said. It's my home. It's Mia's home. It's a building, Sarah said gently. And right now, it's a building that is going to destroy you. Conrad wants that location. I've heard rumors he's trying to buy up the entire waterfront block for a new luxury development. He doesn't care about the nursery. He cares about the land. He needs you out, and he will bankrupt you to make it happen. I left her office feeling heavier than when I arrived. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. The nursery, the grandson, the sentimental speeches, it was all a lie. Conrad didn't want a home for his family. He wanted a parcel of land for his portfolio. He was using his own dead son and his unborn grandchild as pawns in a real estate deal. I drove home in a daze. The house was dark when I arrived. It loomed against the night sky, looking less like a sanctuary and more like a tomb. I walked inside and went straight upstairs. I couldn't look at the empty walls where Mia's art used to be. I went into her room, the room they had violated. It was a mess. The movers had left footprints everywhere. The smell of male cologne lingered, overpowering the scent of lavender. The dresser was askew, shoved against the wall at an odd angle where they had dropped the painting. I needed to clean. I needed to scrub their presence out of this room. I fetched a bucket of soapy water and a rag. I started on the floor, scrubbing the mud from the hardwood until my knuckles turned white. I was crying, silent, hot tears that dripped into the bucket. I scrubbed until the water turned black. Then I moved to the dresser, the heavy oak piece that had broken the painting. I needed to push it back to its original spot. I put my shoulder against it and heaved. It groaned against the floorboards, sliding back inch by inch. As I pushed it, something rattled. It wasn't the sound of something inside the drawers. It was a metallic sound, coming from underneath. I frowned. I got down on my hands and knees and shined the flashlight from my phone under the dresser. There was nothing there but dust bunnies. I pulled the bottom drawer out, setting it on the floor. I reached my hand into the cavity of the dresser, feeling along the wooden frame. My fingers brushed against something cold and hard, taped to the underside of the drawer above it. My heart skipped a beat. I pulled the second drawer out. I turned it over. Duct taped to the bottom of the wood was a small silver key. It wasn't a house key. It looked like a key to a safety deposit box or a secure file cabinet. Next to the key, taped securely, was a folded piece of yellow legal paper. I peeled the tape back carefully, my breath catching in my throat. I recognized the handwriting immediately. It was messy, hurried. The letters slanted to the right. It was Liam's handwriting. I sat back on my heels, surrounded by the wreckage of the room, holding the piece of paper like it was a holy relic. I unfolded it. The date at the top was from 2 weeks before the accident. The note was short. It was terrifying. Taylor, if you are reading this, then something has happened to me, and if you found this key, it means my father has started to move against you. He thinks I don't know about the audits. He thinks I don't know what he is planning for the waterfront. I am scared. I am scared of what he is capable of. I have hidden the insurance, the real ledger, and the truth about the house in the box. Do not trust him. Do not trust anyone. Use this key. It opens box 409 at the First Private Bank on State Street. Go there. Get the truth. In case my father corners you into a dead end, this is your way out. I am sorry I brought this darkness into your life. Love always. Liam. I stared at the note. The silence of the house was no longer oppressive. It was expectant. The gaslighting, the doubts, the dossier. It all shattered in that instant. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't a leech. Liam had known. He had known his father was a monster. and he had left me a weapon. I clutched the key in my fist, the metal biting into my palm. Conrad thought he was fighting a grieving widow. He had no idea he had just armed a soldier. The key was cool against my skin, a jagged piece of silver that promised answers but offered no guarantees. I knew exactly where it belonged. First Private Bank on State Street was not the kind of place you walked into to open a checking account. It was a fortress of old money, a place where the air smelled of mahogany and silence, and where discretion was the only currency that mattered more than gold. Liam had taken me there once, years ago, to show me the architecture of the vault, which dated back to the 1920s. He had joked that it was the only place in Boston where his father could not shout his way through a door. I barely slept that night. I lay in bed clutching the key, listening to the wind rattle the window panes, waiting for the sun to rise. By 8 a.m, I was parked in a garage 3 blocks away from the bank. I walked the rest of the distance, pulling my coat collar up high, my eyes darting from face to face in the morning crowd. I was paranoid. I felt like every pedestrian was a spy sent by Conrad. Every car slowing down was a potential threat. The gaslighting had done its job. It had made me question the fabric of my own reality. But the key in my pocket was real. The bank was imposing, a monolith of gray stone. I pushed through the heavy revolving doors and stepped into the lobby. It was quiet, the kind of hushed atmosphere usually reserved for libraries or cathedrals. A security guard, a man with a jaw like a block of granite, watched me approach the reception desk. "I need to access a safety deposit box," I told the clerk, my voice sounding too loud in the cavernous space. "Box 409. The clerk, a woman with silver hair and rimless glasses, did not smile. She asked for my identification. I handed over my driver's license and the death certificate I had carried in my purse for a year. It was a morbid talisman, but necessary. "I am the executor of my husband's estate," I said. "Liam Vallon." She typed something into her terminal, the clicking of the keys the only sound in the room, after a moment that stretched into an eternity. She nodded. "Mr. Vallon listed you as the co-signer on the box. Mrs. Vallon, you have the physical key?" I produced it. She called for a manager, and soon I was being led down a marble staircase into the belly of the building. The air grew cooler as we descended. We passed through a massive steel gate, then a second one, before standing in front of a wall of brass drawers. The manager used his master key, and I inserted mine. They turned in unison with a satisfying, heavy thunk. He slid the long metal box out and carried it to a private viewing room. "Take as much time as you need," he said, closing the door behind him. I was alone. The room was small, lit by a single fluorescent strip. I sat at the wooden table and stared at the metal box. My hands were shaking so badly, I had to clasp them together to steady them. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of dust and metal, and flipped the lid open. It was not empty. Inside, there were 3 items: a thick manila envelope, a black leather-bound journal, and a silver USB drive. I reached for the envelope first. It was heavy. I undid the string tie and slid the contents onto the table. It was a stack of financial documents, but the paper on top made my heart stop. It was a cashier's check, canceled and processed by the bank. The amount was written in bold. Clear calligraphy, $150,000. The payee was Conrad Sterling. Stapled to the check was a signed document on sterling shipping letterhead. I read it, my eyes widening with every word. It was a loan repayment agreement. I, Conrad Sterling, acknowledge receipt of $150,000 from Liam Vallon, representing the full repayment of principal and interest for the renovation loan regarding the property at 42 Harborview Lane. This payment satisfies all debts and obligations, and the Sterling family retains no lien, equity, or interest in said property. At the bottom of the page, in aggressive, sprawling blue ink, was Conrad's signature. I let out a gasp that sounded like a sob. He had lied. He had looked me in the eye, stood in my hallway, and threatened to sue me for equity he knew he did not have. He had weaponized his own son's generosity to steal my home. Liam hadn't just paid for the renovations. He had paid his father back immediately to ensure our independence. He had bought our freedom, and Conrad had buried the receipt. I felt a surge of vindication so powerful it made me dizzy. This piece of paper was a shield. It was a sword. With this, Conrad's lawsuit would be laughed out of court. I set the document aside, my hands trembling with a different kind of energy now. Rage. Pure, focused rage. I picked up the black journal next. It was worn at the corners. I opened it to a random page near the middle. September 12th, 2024. Dad asked about the house again today. He made a joke about how prime the location is for the new marina project. It wasn't a joke. I saw the way he looked at the blueprints. He doesn't see a home. He sees a footprint for a high-rise. I told him Taylor would never sell. He just smiled that shark smile and said, "Everyone sells eventually. Liam, it is just a matter of leverage. I am scared, not for me, but for her. If something happens to me, who will stand between her and him? He is becoming desperate. The company numbers don't add up. Mia suspects something is wrong with the international accounts. We are going to dig deeper." I turned the page, tears blurring my vision. October 1st, 2024. I paid him back today, every cent. I don't want his money on our walls. I don't want him to have a single hook in our lives. He was furious when I handed him the check. He refused to sign the release at first, but I told him I would walk away from the hospital board if he didn't. He signed it, but his eyes... I have never seen my father look at me with such disdain. He called me a traitor to the family legacy. I am hiding this. I am hiding everything. If I die, Taylor needs to know that I fought for her. I always fought for her. I pressed the journal to my chest. Closing my eyes, I could hear his voice. I could feel his fear. But more than that, I could feel his fierce, protective love. He had known. He had anticipated this exact moment, this exact nightmare, and he had prepared a way out for me. He hadn't just left me a house, he had left me a fortress. "I love you," I whispered to the empty room. "Thank you, Liam." I wiped my face, steeling myself. There was one item left, the USB drive. Liam's note in the journal mentioned Mia. It mentioned international accounts and digging deeper. I put everything back into the box except the USB drive and the loan repayment document. I needed to copy that document immediately, but I could not check the USB drive here, and I certainly could not check it at home, where my Wi-Fi was likely compromised or monitored. I left the bank with the documents tucked securely in my internal coat pocket and the USB drive hidden in my bra. I drove to the other side of the city, to a public library in a neighborhood where no one knew the name Sterling. I found a computer terminal in the back corner, away from the windows. I sat down, checking over my shoulder one last time before plugging the drive in. The computer chimed. A folder window popped up. The drive was named Bustus. I opened it. It was not a chaotic dump of files. It was organized with the precision of a master accountant. That was Mia. She had briefly served as the chief financial officer for a subsidiary of Sterling Shipping before she quit to pursue art. Everyone thought she was just a flighty artist, but she had a mind like a steel trap. There were folders labeled by year: 2023, 2024, 2025. I opened the most recent folder. It contained spreadsheets, scanned invoices, and email threads. I clicked on a file named project_Neptune_summary, XLSX. Rows and columns of numbers filled the screen. I am an architect, not an accountant, but the patterns were obvious. Large sums of money, millions of dollars, were being transferred from the main shipping accounts to a shell company called the Sterling Hope Foundation. I opened a subfolder named Charity_Verification. Mia had done the legwork. There were photos of the charity locations. One address in the Cayman Islands was a shack on a beach. Another address in Panama was an empty lot. The Sterling Hope Foundation was a ghost. Conrad was moving money out of the company, filtering it through these fake charities to avoid taxes, and then funneling it back into private offshore accounts. It was money laundering. It was tax evasion on a massive scale. This was why the maintenance budget for the ships had been cut. This was why the boiler had exploded. He was bleeding the company dry to line his own pockets, sacrificing safety for profit. My hand hovered over the mouse. This was it. This was the nuclear option. If I released this, Sterling Shipping would collapse. Conrad would go to prison for the rest of his life. This was the reason Liam and Mia had died. They knew too much. I felt a cold chill run down my spine. It wasn't an accident. The boiler explosion, the negligence. It wasn't just greed. It was a cleanup operation. I was scrolling through the final folder, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs, when I saw the last file. It didn't fit the pattern. The other files were labeled with dates or financial terms. This one was different. P_Sterling_medical_history ... I frowned. Why would Mia or Liam have a copy of Preston's medical records? What did Preston have to do with the financial crimes? He was weak, a puppet, barely involved in the business operations. Curiosity warred with the urgency to leave. I needed to get this data to the FBI, but I had to know what this was. I double-clicked the file. It was a scanned document from a fertility clinic in Switzerland, dated 12 years ago. The letterhead was in German and English. Patient name, Preston Sterling. Date of birth, June 4th, 1992. Diagnosis, post-pubertal mumps or orchitis. I scanned down the page, reading the doctor's clinical notes. The patient suffered severe inflammation resulting in bilateral testicular atrophy. Semen analysis confirms absolute azoospermia. Condition is permanent and irreversible. Natural conception is biologically impossible. I stopped breathing. I read the line again. Natural conception is biologically impossible. I thought of Bianca. I thought of her smug face, her hand resting on her round belly. I thought of her standing in my hallway, sneering about the Sterling heir, the first male grandchild, the future of the family. Preston was sterile. He had been sterile since he was 18 years old. There was no way he could be the father of Bianca's baby. I scrolled to the bottom of the document. There was a signature acknowledging the diagnosis. It was Preston's shaky scrawl, but below it, as the legal guardian at the time of the initial treatment, was another signature. Conrad Sterling. Conrad knew. He knew his son could not produce an heir, and yet he was parading Bianca around, celebrating this miracle baby, demanding my house for a nursery. Why? If Conrad knew the baby wasn't Preston's, why was he playing along? Unless he didn't care about the bloodline, unless he just needed the prop, or... My mind raced, connecting dots I hadn't even known existed. Bianca, the baby, the timeline, Conrad's obsession with the heir. I looked at the screen, at the cold medical facts that completely dismantled the family's narrative. I wasn't just holding proof of financial crimes. I was holding a grenade that would blow the Sterling family's personal life into smithereens. I ejected the USB drive and gripped it tight. I had walked into the library as a victim. I was walking out as the Grim Reaper. But first, I needed to make sure I survived long enough to use it. I checked my phone. 5 missed calls from unknown number. They knew I was up to something, but they were too late. I opened my eyes and looked at the photo of Bianca I had screenshotted earlier. She was 5 months pregnant. She was glowing, rubbing her belly, playing the role of the fertile, dutiful wife to perfection. If Preston is sterile and Bianca is pregnant, then the math is simple. 1 + 1 does not equal 3 in this equation, not unless there is an external variable. There were only 2 possibilities. Possibility 1. Preston and Bianca had used a sperm donor, and they were passing it off as a natural conception to the public to save Preston's ego. If this were the case, Conrad would likely be in on it. He would orchestrate the lie to protect the family image. Possibility 2. Bianca was lying. I thought about Bianca's behavior, the way she dismissed Preston, the way she looked at him with barely concealed contempt. Would a woman like Bianca, A woman who married into the family for status and money, agreed to a clinical, anonymous sperm donor? Or would she take matters into her own hands to secure her position as the mother of the heir? I needed to know. I did not just need a theory. I needed ammunition. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in 3 years. "Mark," I said when the line clicked open. "It is Taylor Vallon. I have a job for you." Mark was a private investigator, but before that, he had been a contractor I worked with on site surveys. He was cynical, discreet, and he hated the Boston elite almost as much as I did right now. "Taylor," his voice was rough, like gravel in a mixer. "I heard about Liam. I'm sorry." "Don't be," I said, cutting straight to the chase. "I need you to track someone, Bianca Sterling. I need her travel history for the last 6 months, specifically her trips to New York. She claims they are for modeling, but I have a feeling her portfolio isn't the only thing getting expanded." "The Instagram wife?" Mark let out a low whistle. "High profile, expensive." "I have the money," I said, thinking of the refund check I now held. "I need to know who she is seeing. And Mark, I need photos. High resolution, undeniable proof." "Give me 24 hours, he said. I spent the next day in a state of hyper-focused anxiety. I went to the bank, a different bank this time, and deposited the cashier's check into a new account solely in my name. I secured the funds. Then I went to a print shop and made 5 copies of the loan repayment document and the medical records. I mailed 1 set to Sarah, my lawyer, with strict instructions not to open it unless I went missing. I hid another set in the spare tire well of my car. I was building a fortress of evidence. That night, I sat in the dark living room, watching the lights of the harbor. I tried to get into Conrad's head. Why was he pushing this heir narrative so hard? If he knew Preston was sterile, he must know the baby isn't a biological Sterling. Was he so desperate for a legacy that he was willing to accept a counterfeit heir? Or was it possible that Conrad, the man who knew everything, was actually the one being played? It seemed impossible. Conrad micromanaged every aspect of his empire. He had spies everywhere. How could he not know what his daughter-in-law was doing? Unless the betrayal was coming from inside the house, unless the person helping Bianca was someone Conrad trusted implicitly. My phone buzzed at 11 o'clock at night. It was an encrypted email from Mark. Subject: "The apple doesn't fall far." Attached was a folder of photographs. I clicked the first one. It was taken with a long-range lens. Grainy but clear enough. It showed the entrance of a boutique hotel in Manhattan. The timestamp was 4 months ago, right around the time of conception. Bianca was walking out of the revolving doors. She was wearing sunglasses and a scarf, trying to be low-key, but the red-soled shoes gave her away. Walking next to her, his hand resting familiarly on the small of her back, was a man. I zoomed in. My breath hitched in my throat. I recognized him instantly. I had seen him at the funeral. I had seen him at the company Christmas parties. I had seen him yesterday, standing silently behind Conrad in the rain, holding the legal briefcase. It was Arthur Penhaligon, the chief legal counsel for Sterling Shipping, Conrad's right-hand man, his fixer, the man who knew where all the bodies were buried because he was usually the one digging the graves. Arthur was 50 years old, divorced, and ruthlessly ambitious. He was the architect of the legal strategies that kept Conrad out of jail. He was the one who had likely drafted the fake equity claim against my house. I clicked through the rest of the photos. Bianca and Arthur at dinner in a dimly lit booth. Bianca and Arthur enter an elevator. And the final kill shot. Bianca and Arthur kissing in the back of a cab. I sat back, stunned by the sheer magnitude of the betrayal. It was almost Shakespearean. Conrad was fighting to steal my home to build a nursery for a grandchild that wasn't his, fathered by the very lawyer he was using to sue me. Bianca wasn't just cheating. She was staging a coup. She was planting a cuckoo in the nest by having Arthur's baby and passing it off as Preston's. She secured her financial future with the Sterlings. And Arthur? Arthur would have ultimate control. He would be the biological father of the future CEO. He would control the trust fund. He would control the company. They were playing Conrad for a fool. A cold, hard laugh bubbled up from my chest. It was a sound I hadn't made in a year. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was the laugh of a general who had just realized the enemy left their flank completely exposed. Conrad thought I was the threat. He thought the greedy widow was the problem he had to solve. He was so focused on destroying me that he didn't see the knife being sharpened in his own boardroom. I had them. I had all of them. I had Conrad on tax fraud and embezzlement. I had Preston on a lie that would shatter his marriage. I had Bianca on adultery and paternity fraud. And I had Arthur Penhaligon, the brilliant legal mind, caught in a scandal that would not only disbar him, but likely get him killed by Conrad before the police even arrived. I organized the files. I created a new presentation. I wasn't just going to win a lawsuit. I was going to dismantle a dynasty. The next morning, the rain had stopped, replaced by a thick, oppressive fog that rolled off the Atlantic. I was drinking coffee, black, staring at the wall where I intended to hang a new painting, one I would buy with my own money, when a bike messenger arrived. He didn't knock. He simply slid a thick red envelope under the door and vanished into the mist. I picked it up. The paper was heavy, expensive. There was no return address, just my name handwritten in calligraphy. Inside was a single sheet of paper, embossed with the seal of Penhaligon and Associates. Notice of urgent family arbitration. Dear Ms. Valen, in lieu of immediate filing of the petition for partition and sale regarding the property at 42 Harbor View Lane, Mr. Conrad Sterling formally requests your presence at a private family settlement meeting. Failure to appear will be interpreted as a refusal to negotiate in good faith, and we will proceed with the maximum litigation strategy, including but not limited to freezing your personal accounts and filing a motion for mental competency evaluation. Date: this Sunday, February 8th. Time: 7 o'clock in the evening. Location: the Sterling Estate, Main Library. Regrets only. I read the letter twice. It was a masterpiece of intimidation. The threat of a mental competency evaluation was particularly vicious, a direct jab at my grief, implying that my mourning made me insane. It was designed to scare me into submission. They wanted to drag me into their territory, surround me with their wealth and their lawyers, and bully me into signing over the deed. It was a trap. I knew it was a trap. Arthur Penhaligon had likely drafted this letter himself, probably sitting in bed next to Bianca while they laughed about how easy it would be to crush me. I walked over to the desk where I had placed the USB drive and the printed photos. I looked at the date on the invitation. Sunday, 2 days from now. They wanted a family meeting? They wanted to talk about assets and legacy? I picked up a pen and flipped the invitation over. On the back, in steady, unwavering letters, I wrote my RSVP. I'll be there. I wasn't going to that house to negotiate a surrender. I was going to deliver a eulogy. Fear is a biological mechanism. It is designed to keep you alive, to trigger the flight response when a predator enters your peripheral vision. But after 48 hours of living in a state of high-alert adrenaline, my fear had burned itself out. It had been replaced by a cold, humming engine of calculation. I looked at the red envelope on my desk, the summons to my own execution, and I did not feel the urge to run. I felt the urge to hunt. I had 2 days before the Sunday deadline, 48 hours to transform myself from a victim into an executioner. Friday morning began with logistics. I treated the evidence I had gathered not as papers and files, but as uranium. It was radioactive, and if I mishandled it, it would kill me. I went to a 24-hour copy center in the next town over, wearing a baseball cap and sunglasses. I made 3 complete sets of everything: the loan repayment agreement, the fraudulent charity ledgers, the photos of Bianca and Arthur, and Preston's medical records. I bought 3 heavy-duty flash drives. I encrypted them with passwords that only I knew. The first set was my insurance policy. I drove into the city, to the office of Elias Thorne. Thorne was a relic of the old Boston legal scene, a man who had been disbarred from the prestigious firms for being too aggressive, too loud, and too willing to fight dirty. He hated Conrad Sterling. Legend had it that Conrad had cheated Thorne out of a partnership 20 years ago. I did not make an appointment. I simply walked in and handed the sealed package to his bewildered receptionist. "Give this to Mr. Thorne," I said, my voice flat. "Tell him it is from the daughter-in-law of Conrad Sterling. Tell him that if he does not hear from me by Monday morning at 9 o'clock, he is to open this package and unleash hell." I left before she could ask questions. I knew Thorne. He would not open it early. He would savor the anticipation. And if I disappeared, he would burn Conrad's empire to the ground just for the sport of it. The second set went into a new safety deposit box at a bank completely unconnected to my previous life or the Sterlings. The third set stayed with me. It was the ammunition I would carry into the room. My next stop was the bank where Liam had transferred the money. I needed the loan repayment to be bulletproof. I met with the branch manager, a nervous man who sweated when I showed him the document. I made him pull the original transaction logs from the archive. I made him stamp and notarize a fresh affidavit, confirming that the $150,000 had indeed moved from Liam's account to Conrad's personal account on the date specified. "Is there a problem, Mrs. Valen?" he asked, wiping his forehead with a handkerchief. "No," I said, tucking the affidavit into my bag. "Just tidying up some loose ends." By Friday afternoon, the legal and financial foundation was laid. Now, I need to work in the theater. Conrad Sterling did not respect the law. He respected power. He respected perception. If I walked into that meeting wearing my grieving widow's weeds, the black wool, the modest hemline, the tear-stained cheeks, he would eat me alive. He expected Taylor to be the victim. He expected Taylor, the landscape architect, to play in the dirt. I needed to become someone else. I drove to Newberry Street, parking my sensible SUV between two Porsches. I walked into a boutique that I usually avoided because the prices were obscene. The salesgirl looked at my jeans and raincoat with a sneer, but I ignored her. I went straight to the rack of evening wear. I pushed past the blacks and the navies. I was looking for a weapon. I found it. It was a silk sheath dress in a shade of red, so deep it looked like oxygenated blood. It was structured, architectural, with a neckline that was sharp and a back that plunged. It was not a dress for mourning. It was a dress for a victory lap. "I need this tailored by tomorrow afternoon," I told the salesgirl. "We usually require a week for alterations," she sniffed. I pulled out my credit card, the one linked to my personal savings, not the joint account Conrad might be monitoring. "I will pay double the rush fee. Have it ready by 4 o'clock tomorrow." She took the card. Money, as always, spoke the universal language. Saturday was for the script. I spent the entire day in my living room, the curtains drawn, treating the upcoming meeting like a design project. I mapped out the room in my head. Conrad would sit at the head of the table. Arthur would be to his right. Preston and Bianca would be on the periphery. I wrote out the dialogue. I anticipated their arguments. Conrad will lead with the equity claim. He will try to bully me with the legal costs. Arthur will chime in with statutes and precedents. Bianca will play the emotional card, crying about the baby. I drafted my responses. I memorized the dates, the amounts, the account numbers. I rehearsed the reveal of the photos. I practiced the tone of voice I would use, low, steady, devoid of the trembling that had plagued me for the last year. Then, I sat down and wrote a letter. It was addressed to Preston. I wrote it by hand, my pen digging into the paper. "Dear Preston, you have spent your whole life trying to be the son your father wanted. You let him bully you. You let him control you. You even let him hide the truth about your own body from the world. I know about the mumps. Preston, I know about the clinic in Switzerland. I know that you cannot be a father. So ask yourself, who is the father of the child your wife is carrying? And why is your father so desperate to give that child my home? Look to your right. Look at the man sitting next to your father. Look at Arthur. Wake up." I folded the letter and put it in a plain white envelope. I did not stamp it. I did not mail it. This was a tactical nuke. I would only use it if the direct confrontation failed. If I couldn't destroy them in the room, I would leave this grenade on Preston's windshield and let him blow up the family from the inside. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. It was a text message. The name on the screen made my lip curl. Bianca. You should really start packing. Sweetie, I drove by today and the house looks so sad. Don't make us have security drag you out on Monday. Think of your dignity. I stared at the screen. She was baiting me. She wanted me to lash out, to send a furious text that she could show to Conrad and say, "See? She is crazy." I opened the emoji keyboard. I selected a single image. A smiling face. I hit send. Let her wonder. Let her stew. Let her think I was delusional. The element of surprise was the only advantage I had against their billions. Sunday morning arrived with a gray, steely sky. The air was cold, biting. I spent the morning grooming myself like a gladiator preparing for the arena. I blew out my hair until it was sleek and straight. I applied my makeup with surgical precision, sharp eyeliner, red lipstick that matched the dress. I put on the diamond earrings Liam had given me for our first anniversary. They were the only piece of jewelry I wore. I left my wedding ring on the nightstand. I wasn't going there as a wife. I was going as a woman who owned her own life. At 3 o'clock, I drove to the cemetery. The grass was wet, but it wasn't raining. I walked to the twin headstones. I didn't bring flowers this time. Flowers were for grief. Today, I made a promise. I touched the cold granite of Liam's name. I found the key, I told him, my voice steady in the quiet air. I found everything. You were right about them. You were right about all of it. I looked at Mia's stone next to his. I know what happened on the boat. Mia, I said. I know about the maintenance logs. I know he traded your life for a higher profit margin. I am going to make him pay for that. I promise you, I am going to take his reputation, his company, and his legacy, and I'm going to bury them right here next to you. I stood there for a long time, drawing strength from the silence. I felt a strange sense of peace. The sadness was still there, a deep, oceanic current, but the surface was calm. I was ready. I walked back to my car, my heels clicking on the paved path. I felt formidable. I felt unbreakable. I pulled into my driveway at 4:30. I needed to change into the red dress and gather the documents. The meeting was at 7. I pressed the garage door opener. The door rumbled up. I froze. My car, my reliable, sensible SUV that I needed to drive to the Sterling estate, was sitting on its rims. All 4 tires were slashed. Thick, jagged gashes tore through the rubber sidewalls. The vehicle listed to the left, looking like a wounded animal. I walked around it, my breath coming in short bursts. This wasn't random vandalism. My driveway was long, secluded. Someone had come up here while I was at the cemetery. Someone had watched me leave. On the windshield, tucked under the wiper blade, was a note. It was written on cheap notebook paper in block letters. Don't be late. I pulled the note free and crumpled it in my fist. Conrad. He was escalating. He knew I was up to something, or perhaps he just wanted to rattle me, to force me to call a cab, to arrive flustered and vulnerable. He wanted me to be the damsel in distress, dependent on his mercy. He wanted to break my psychological armor before I even stepped foot in his house. He had made a fatal error. He thought slashing my tires would make me afraid. He thought it would make me stay home. I looked at the crippled car, and then I looked at the house. I had legs. I had a phone. I had a taxi app. But more importantly, I had rage. This wasn't a warning. It was a declaration of war. And if Conrad Sterling wanted a war, he was going to get one. He had just ensured that I would show no mercy. I went inside and called a ride-sharing service. I ordered the most expensive luxury sedan available. I will not be late. Conrad, I whispered to the empty room as I unzipped the garment bag holding the red dress. In fact, I'm going to be right on time. The Sterling estate was not a home. It was a monument to ego. Situated on a cliff overlooking the Atlantic, it was a sprawling, stone fortress that screamed old money and new insecurities. The iron gates were twice the height of a man. and the driveway was long enough to allow a visitor plenty of time to feel inadequate before they even reached the front door. I watched the house loom closer through the tinted window of the luxury sedan I had hired. The driver, a quiet man who sensed the tension radiating off me, pulled up to the portico and idled. "Wait for me," I told him, handing him $100 bill. "I do not care how long it takes. Do not leave this spot." He nodded. He was my getaway car, my tether to the sane world. I stepped out. The air was crisp, smelling of salt and manicured boxwood. I adjusted my coat, clutching the leather bag that contained the destruction of a dynasty. I walked up the limestone steps, my heels clicking a sharp, military rhythm. I did not ring the doorbell. The door was opened before I could reach for it by Sterling's longtime butler, Henderson. He looked at me, his face a mask of professional indifference, but I saw the flicker of surprise in his eyes. He was expecting the grieving, broken widow in black. "Good evening, Henderson," I said, sweeping past him into the foyer. "They are in the library, I assume." "Yes, Mrs. Vallon," he murmured. "May I take your coat?" "Please." I shrugged off the trench coat. Underneath, I was wearing a red dress. It was a violent shade of crimson, tailored to fit like a second skin. In a house of muted beiges, grays, and blacks, I was a walking open wound, vibrant and impossible to ignore. I saw Henderson's eyes widen slightly. Good. That was the first strike. I walked down the long hallway, passing the oil portraits of dead Sterlings who looked down with disapproving glares. I felt no fear. I felt a cold, exhilarating clarity. I reached the double oak doors of the library and pushed them open without knocking. The conversation inside died instantly. It was a tableau of rot dressed in finery. The library was a cavernous room lined with books that no one read, smelling of lemon polish and expensive scotch. Conrad sat at the head of the massive mahogany table, looking like a king holding court. He was wearing a velvet smoking jacket, holding a crystal tumbler of amber liquid. To his left sat Eleanor, his wife. She was a ghost of a woman, pale and thin, dressed in gray, her hands folded in her lap. She stared at the table, refusing to look up. She was the silent accomplice, the woman who had learned that blindness was the price of comfort. To Conrad's right sat Arthur Penhaligon, the traitor, the fixer, the lover. He was leaning back in his chair, tapping a gold pen against a leather legal pad. He looked bored, arrogant, a man who thought he controlled the board. And further down, sitting close together like two frightened children playing house, were Preston and Bianca. Preston looked nauseous. His face was pale, clammy. He refused to meet my eyes. Bianca, however, was in full performance mode. She wore a soft, pastel maternity dress, her hand resting protectively on her stomach, her face arranged in a mask of pitying superiority. "You're late," Conrad said, his voice booming across the room. He didn't stand up. "I had car trouble," I said, my voice smooth and light. "But I'm sure you already knew that, Conrad." I walked to the empty chair at the foot of the table, directly opposite him. I did not sit immediately. I stood there, letting them take in the red dress. I saw Bianca's eyes narrow in jealousy. I saw Preston swallow hard. I saw Arthur sit up straighter, his eyes tracking the curve of the silk. "That is a bold color for a widow," Bianca sniffed, breaking the silence. "We thought you would be in mourning." "I am celebrating," I said, pulling the chair out and sitting down with deliberate grace. "It is not every day you get invited to a family reunion." Conrad cleared his throat, annoyed that I wasn't cowering. He gestured to Arthur. "Let us dispense with the pleasantries," Conrad said. "We are here to solve a problem. You, Taylor, are the problem." He slid a thick document across the polished wood of the table. It stopped halfway, requiring me to lean forward to retrieve it. I didn't move. I just looked at it. "This is a generous offer," Conrad continued, leaning forward, his eyes hard. "Arthur has drawn up a purchase and sale agreement. The Sterling Trust is willing to buy out your disputed share of the property. Disputed, I repeated, the word rolling off my tongue. We are prepared to offer you $300,000, Arthur said. His voice was smooth, oily, the voice of a man who sold lies for a living. It is a fair market assessment, considering the liens we would be assuming and the significant equity Conrad holds due to the renovations. $300,000. The house was worth $2 million. They were offering me pennies. They were trying to steal my future for the price of a used yacht. And if I refuse? I asked, looking at Arthur. Arthur smiled, a thin, predatory expression. Then we proceed with litigation. We will file for a partition sale. We will freeze the assets. We will argue that your mental state, evidenced by your erratic behavior and this costume you are wearing, renders you incompetent to manage the estate. We will tie you up in court for 5 years. Taylor, by the time we are done, the legal fees will have eaten everything you own. You will walk away with nothing. It's for the best. Taylor, Bianca chimed in, her voice dripping with fake concern. Think about the baby. He needs that room. It's his birthright. Don't be selfish. Take the money and go find a nice apartment somewhere. Start over. Maybe find a hobby. Preston said nothing. He just stared at his hands, twisting his wedding ring. I looked at them. I looked at each one of them. The father who killed his son for profit, the lawyer who was sleeping with the daughter-in-law, the wife who was faking a lineage, the husband who was living a lie. They were grotesque. Henderson, I called out, not looking away from Conrad. The butler appeared from the shadows. Yes, madam? I would like a cup of tea, Earl Grey, black. Conrad slammed his hand on the table, making the crystal glasses jump. This is not a social call. Read the contract. I am thirsty, I said calmly, and I never sign anything on a dry throat. Henderson looked at Conrad, who waved his hand dismissively. Get her the damn tea. The room descended into a heavy, suffocating silence while we waited. I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the corner. Tick, tock, tick, tock. It was the countdown to their destruction. I watched Arthur. He was shifting in his seat. He kept glancing at Bianca. It was subtle, just a flicker of the eyes. But it was there, an intimacy, a shared secret. Preston noticed nothing. He was too busy drowning in his own inadequacy. Henderson returned with a silver tray. He placed the china cup before me. Thank you, I said. I lifted the cup. I blew on the steam. I took a sip. I set it down with a soft clink. I did this slowly, deliberately. I wanted them to feel my lack of fear. I wanted them to wonder why I wasn't trembling. You are testing my patience, Taylor, Conrad growled. We have the police commissioner coming for dinner in an hour. I want this settled before he arrives. Sign the papers. You know, I said, ignoring his command and looking around the library. Liam hated this room. He told me it felt like a museum where the exhibits were people. Do not speak his name, Eleanor whispered. It was the first time she had spoken. Her voice was brittle, like dry leaves. You do not have the right. I have every right, Eleanor, I said softly. I was the one who woke up screaming for 6 months after he died. I was the one who identified his body. Where were you? Oh, that's right. You were at the spa in Zurich. Eleanor flinched as if I had slapped her. Enough, Conrad roared. He stood up, towering over the table. I am done playing games. You are a leech. Taylor, you are a gold digger who got lucky for a few years. And now the ride is over. Sign the damn paper, or I swear to God, I will have the guards throw you out, and we will see you in court. Arthur leaned forward, his face menacing. He is not bluffing. Taylor, we have the evidence. We have the receipts for the renovations. We have witnesses who will testify to your instability. You have no leverage here. Zero. I looked at Arthur. Then I looked at Conrad. Then I looked at the pen lying on the contract. You want me to sign? I asked. Immediately, Arthur said. And if I sign, I walk away with $300,000. And you get the house? Correct, Conrad said, sitting back down, thinking he had won. He adjusted his cufflinks, his arrogance returning in full force. It is the only logical choice. I smiled. It was not a nice smile. It was the smile of the shark that Conrad claimed to be. I agree, I said. Logic is very important. Facts are very important. And before I sign away my home and my husband's memory, I think it is only fair that we review some facts together. What are you talking about? Bianca snapped. Just sign it and leave. I reached down and picked up my leather bag. I placed it on the table. The sound of the heavy leather hitting the wood was loud in the quiet room. You mentioned memories. Conrad, I said, unbuckling the clasp. You mentioned family. You mentioned legacy. I have been doing some thinking about all of those things. And I found some very interesting items that I think we should discuss. I reached into the bag. I bypassed the USB drive. I bypassed the medical records. I went for the visual aid first. You said I have no leverage, I said, my voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. But I think you are mistaken. I think I have all the leverage. I pulled out the first manila folder. It was the one containing the financial documents, the loan repayment check, and the affidavit I had secured yesterday. Let's start with the house, I said, holding the folder up, and the $150,000 you claim Liam owes you. I tossed the folder down the long mahogany table. It slid across the polished surface like a hockey puck, spinning as it went, and came to a rest directly in front of Conrad. Open it, I said. I think you will recognize your own signature. The manila folder came to a stop inches from Conrad's bourbon glass. For a moment, no one moved. The library was silent, save for the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock, measuring out the seconds of their dismantling. Conrad stared at the folder as if it were a venomous snake coiled on his mahogany table. He didn't want to touch it. He knew, with the instinct of a man who had spent 40 years bearing secrets, that whatever was inside that folder was going to hurt. Go ahead, I said, my voice cutting through the heavy air like a razor. Open it. It isn't locked, unlike the room you broke into. Arthur Penhaligon, sensing the shift in atmospheric pressure, reached out. I will take a look at this. Nice. No, I snapped. My eyes remained locked on Conrad. This is a family matter, isn't it? Conrad claims he is the patriarch. He claims he paid for my roof. He claims he owns 40% of my life. He should have the courage to look at the receipt. Conrad's jaw tightened, the muscles bunching under his skin. He set his glass down with a heavy clink and flipped the folder open. The first thing he saw was the photocopy of the cashier's check. It was enlarged, clear, and undeniable. October 1st, 2024, I recited, leaning back in my chair, swirling my tea. Bank of America, cashier's check number 009452. Remitter, Liam Vallon. Payee, Conrad Sterling. Amount, $150,000. I watched the color drain from his face. It didn't happen all at once. It started at his lips, which went pale, and then spread up to his cheeks, leaving behind a splotchy grayish complexion. And underneath that, I continued, enjoying the show, is the loan repayment agreement. You might remember signing it. Conrad, it was a Tuesday. Liam came to your office. He told you he didn't want your strings attached to his home. He paid you back every single penny of the renovation costs, plus 3% interest just to be sure you couldn't complain. Conrad's hand trembled slightly as he turned the page to the agreement. There it was, his signature, bold, aggressive, and legally binding. This, Conrad stammered, his voice lacking its usual thunder. This is a fabrication. It is a notarized affidavit from the bank manager, I corrected him. I picked it up yesterday, along with the original transaction logs. Liam paid you back 2 weeks after the contractors finished. You don't own 40% of my house. Conrad, you don't even own a shingle on the roof. Arthur snatched the folder from Conrad's hands. He scanned the documents with the frantic speed of a lawyer realizing he had just walked into a malpractice suit. He pulled a pair of reading glasses from his pocket and peered at the notary seal. He checked the dates. He checked the account numbers. Conrad, Arthur whispered, But in the silence of the room, it sounded like a shout. Is this real? It was a complex transaction. Conrad sputtered, shifting in his seat. He looked at Arthur, then at Preston, then anywhere but at me. There were other costs, administrative fees, the trust fund management. The interest rates fluctuated. That money was just a partial payment against the wider debt Liam owed the family for his education. His education? I laughed. It was a sharp, barking sound. Liam paid for medical school with his own loans and a scholarship. He didn't take a dime from you after he turned 25. And this document? It specifically states, full repayment of all obligations regarding the property. Read the fine print. Arthur, your boss signed away all equitable interest. Arthur looked up at Conrad. The look on the lawyer's face was one of pure, unadulterated horror. He realized he had drafted a lawsuit based on a lie that his client had told him. He had threatened me with perjury based on manufactured evidence. Conrad, Arthur hissed, leaning in close. If this document is authentic, the partition suit is dead. Worse, if we file, she can countersue for fraud. You told me there was no repayment. I forgot, Conrad yelled, slamming his hand on the table, trying to regain control through volume. It was years ago. I handle millions of dollars a day. You expect me to remember one check for $150,000? You seem to remember the renovations well enough to itemize them in the dossier you sent me, I countered coolly. You remembered the price of the slate. You remembered the price of the heating system. Funny how your memory works. Conrad, it remembers the debits but conveniently forgets the credits. You are twisting things, Conrad shouted, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. You are trying to trap me on a technicality. My son gave me that money as a gift. It wasn't for the house. A gift? I raised an eyebrow. Is that what we are calling it now? Larceny? I am the head of this family, Conrad bellowed, standing up again. I decide what the money is for. Liam was my son. He did what I told him to do. He knew that house belonged to the Sterlings. You really are a piece of work, I said, shaking my head. But I knew you would lie. I knew you would try to gaslight me even with the check right in front of your face. That is why I brought backup. I reached into my bag again. This time, I didn't pull out a paper. I pulled out my smartphone and a small, high-quality Bluetooth speaker. I set the speaker on the table and turned it on. The little blue light blinked, connecting instantly. What is that? Bianca asked, her voice shrill. What are you doing? Listening to the dead, I said. I tapped the screen. The audio was crisp. It had been recorded in Conrad's office. I recognized the acoustics. Mia had recorded it on her phone during one of her accounting meetings with her father, just weeks before she died. Click. Conrad's voice. I see the transfer from Liam. $150,000. Mark it as consulting fees in the general ledger. Mia's voice. But Dad, the memo line says house repayment. If we mark it as consulting, he's going to get hit with a tax liability he doesn't owe, and it messes up the property records. He wants the line removed. Conrad's voice. I don't care what he wants. Do not release the line. Keep the receipt in the private safe. Do not send him the confirmation. Mia's voice. Why? He paid for it. It's his house. Conrad's voice. Because as long as he thinks he owes me, I have leverage. Liam is getting too independent. He thinks he can just play doctor and forget who built him. If he thinks the family still owns a piece of that roof, he'll think twice about skipping the next shareholder meeting. Keep the receipt hidden. Mia, that is an order. Mia's voice. This is wrong. Dad, it's illegal. Conrad's voice. It is a family business. Now get out. Click. The recording ended. The silence that followed was absolute. It was heavy, suffocating, and absolute. Arthur Penhaligon slowly took his glasses off and placed them on the table. He looked at Conrad with a mixture of disbelief and professional distance. He was already calculating how to distance himself from this sinking ship. You hid it, Arthur said quietly. You didn't forget. You hid it, intentionally. Conrad sank back into his chair. He looked smaller suddenly. The bluster was gone, punctured by his own voice recorded from the grave. He opened his mouth to speak, to spin another lie, but he was cut off. "You lied to me." The voice came from the left. It was Eleanor. We all turned to look at her. Eleanor Sterling, the woman who had spent 40 years being a piece of furniture in her own home, was looking at her husband. Her eyes were wide, red-rimmed, and for the first time in my life, they were focused. "Eleanor, darling, you don't understand business," Conrad began, his voice wheedling. "I understand that Liam called me," Eleanor said, her voice trembling but gaining strength with every word. "He called me that week. He was so proud. He told me, 'Mom, I paid Dad back. The house is fully ours now. Taylor doesn't have to worry. And when I asked you about it, you told me he had borrowed more money. You told me he was in debt. You told me he was irresponsible.'" "I was protecting you," Conrad snapped. "You made me think my son was a failure," Eleanor screamed. The sound was shocking in the elegant room. She stood up, her hands shaking. "My son is dead. Conrad, he is dead. And you let me believe he died a failure who couldn't support his wife. You let me treat Taylor like a charity case because I thought she was living on your money." "Sit down, Eleanor," Conrad ordered. "No!" she shouted. She looked at me across the table. "Taylor, I didn't know. I swear to you, I didn't know he had paid it back." "I know, Eleanor," I said softly. "He kept you in the dark just like he kept Liam in a cage." I turned my gaze back to Conrad. He was cornered. The legal threat regarding the house had evaporated. He couldn't sue me for equity now. The audio recording proved fraudulent intent. If he took this to court, he wouldn't just lose. He would face criminal charges for fraud and potentially racketeering. Arthur Penhaligon leaned over to Conrad. "We have to drop the property claim," he whispered, loud enough for me to hear. "Right now, if she releases that tape to the probate judge, you will be removed as the executor of the main estate. It proves breach of fiduciary duty." Conrad looked at me with pure hatred. "You think you're clever," he spat. "You think because you found one piece of paper you have won?" "I haven't just won the house, Conrad," I said. "I have exposed you. You are a fraud. You tried to steal a widow's home because you couldn't control your own son." The tension in the room shifted. The house was safe. I knew it. They knew it. The purchase and sale agreement lay on the table, a useless piece of trash. But the Sterlings were like hydras. You cut off one head, and another one hissed at you. Bianca, who had been watching the exchange with wide eyes, suddenly realized that her future, her nursery, her ocean view, her status, was slipping away. She decided to play the only card she had left. "Fine!" Bianca cried out, her voice breaking into a practiced sob. She grabbed Preston's hand, squeezing it until his knuckles turned white. "So Liam paid it back. Fine. But does that really matter? We are family. Look at this house. It's massive. It has 5 bedrooms. And you are just one person. Taylor." She stood up, thrusting her belly forward, turning her profile so the light hit the curve of her pregnancy. "I am carrying the future of this family," she wailed. "Preston's son? Conrad's grandson. Does that mean nothing to you? Are you so cold, so heartless, that you would let your nephew grow up in a condo while you rattle around in that mansion with nothing but ghosts?" She looked at Eleanor, appealing to the grandmother's instinct. "Mom, tell her. Tell her that family comes first. This baby deserves the Sterling estate. It's the legacy. How can she deny a home to an innocent child?" Preston looked miserable. He stared at the table, refusing to support his wife, but refusing to stop her either. "It is just a room, Taylor," Bianca pleaded, changing her tone to one of begging. "We just want the nursery. We can share the house. You can be the cool aunt. Don't punish the baby because you hate Conrad. This is about the next generation. This is about the Sterling bloodline." I watched her performance. It was impressive. If I didn't know the truth, I might have felt a twinge of guilt. She was weaponizing biology. She was using the sacredness of a grandson to pave over the crimes of the grandfather. I took a slow sip of my tea. I set the cup down. I looked at Bianca, then at Preston, and finally, I let my gaze settle on Arthur. "You make a compelling point, Bianca," I said calmly. "Family is important. Bloodlines are important. The truth is important." "Exactly," Bianca said, thinking she had found a crack in my armor. "So be reasonable. Do it for Preston. Do it for the baby." "The baby," I repeated. "The sterling heir." I reached into my leather bag for the second time. The atmosphere in the room changed again. Conrad, who was still fuming over the check, looked up warily. Arthur stopped whispering. I pulled out the second manila folder. This one was thinner. It contained only a few pages. But they were pages that would burn this family to the ground faster than any financial record. "You keep talking about this baby as the sterling heir," I said, holding the folder in my hands. "You keep appealing to Preston's rights as a father. And you, Conrad, you have been parading this pregnancy around Boston like it is the second coming of Christ." I turned to look directly at Preston. He looked up, his eyes meeting mine. He looked terrified. He knew. Deep down, he had to know. Or maybe he was in such deep denial that he had convinced himself of a miracle. "Taylor, what is that?" Preston asked, his voice barely a whisper. "I think you know what this is." "Preston," I said gently, "because you were there when it was written, 12 years ago, in Switzerland." Bianca froze. The color didn't just drain from her face, it vanished, leaving her looking like a wax statue. Her hand dropped from her belly. "Speaking of the grandson," I said, my voice hardening into steel, "I have a special gift for you. Preston, a reminder of a trip you took when you were 18. I tossed the folder onto the table. It landed in front of Preston. "Open it," I commanded, "and tell your wife the good news." The folder lay on the mahogany table between Preston and me, a thin barrier between his delusion and his destruction. It was just paper. It was cellulose and ink, but I knew that the moment he touched it, the life he thought he was living would incinerate. "What is this?" Preston asked again, his voice trembling. He looked at the folder, then at me, with the eyes of a dog expecting to be kicked. "It is the truth, Preston," I said, my voice low and steady. "It is the one thing your father and your wife have never given you." Bianca made a noise in her throat, a strangled sound of panic. She reached out, her manicured claws raking across the table. "Don't open it! Preston! She fabricated it! She is just trying to hurt us because she is jealous. Don't you see? She is barren and bitter." "Stop talking, Bianca," I snapped. I didn't even look at her. My gaze was fixed on my brother-in-law. "Open it, Preston, or are you going to let them decide what you are allowed to know for the rest of your life?" Preston hesitated. He looked at Conrad. Conrad was staring at the folder with a dawning look of horror. He recognized the logo on the cover through the translucent plastic. He knew exactly what was inside. "Preston, don't," Conrad warned, his voice tight. "We don't need to indulge in her games." That was the mistake. If Conrad had remained silent, Preston might have obeyed, but the command, the reflex to control, pushed Preston over the edge. He was a weak man, but even a worm will turn if you step on it hard enough. Preston grabbed the folder. He flipped it open. The room went so quiet, I could hear the rain starting to tap against the library windows again. Preston read. I watched his eyes scan the header, Zurich Fertility Institute. I watched him read the patient details. Preston Sterling, age 18. He blinked, confusion warring with comprehension. He read the diagnosis. "Azoospermia," he whispered. He stumbled over the word. He looked up at me, his face pale. I don't understand. What does this mean?" "It means 0 sperm count. Preston," I said. I did not sugarcoat it. "There is no way to break a man's heart gently when you are holding a sledgehammer. It means you suffered a complication from mumps when you were a teenager. The inflammation caused permanent atrophy. You are sterile. You have been sterile for 14 years. No, Preston shook his head. A weak, childish denial. That's not true. We are having a baby. Bianca is pregnant. Read the rest, I commanded. Look at the prognosis. Spontaneous recovery is biologically impossible. You cannot have children. Preston, you never could. But, he looked around the room, frantic. But the doctor. Dad took me to the specialist. He told me everything was fine. He said it was just a minor infection. Look at the bottom of the page, I said. Look at the signature next to yours. Preston looked down. His finger traced the black ink at the bottom of the document. Guardian signature, Conrad Sterling. Preston froze. He stared at that signature for a long time. It was the signature on his college applications. It was the signature on his marriage license. It was the signature on his trust fund checks. It was the signature of the man who defined his entire existence. Slowly, painfully, Preston lifted his head. He looked at his father. You signed this, Preston said. His voice was unrecognizable. It wasn't the voice of the dutiful son anymore. It was the voice of a man waking up in a coffin. You knew. Conrad didn't answer. He couldn't. He sat there, his mouth a grim line, his eyes shifting away. You knew, Preston screamed. He slammed his hand on the table, making Bianca jump. You knew I couldn't have kids. You let me try for 3 years. You let me go to the doctors who told me it was stress. You make me feel like a failure every single month. Why? Why didn't you tell me? I was protecting you, Conrad shouted back, his defense automatic and hollow. You were 18. You were a boy. I didn't want you to feel less than a man. I thought we could handle it later. You thought you could manipulate me, Preston spat. Just like you manipulate everything. He turned slowly to Bianca. Bianca was shrinking in her chair. Her face was the color of old ash. She had her hands over her belly, but it no longer looked like a protective gesture. It looked like she was trying to hide evidence. And you, Preston whispered. The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. You are pregnant. Baby, listen to me, Bianca stammered, tears streaming down her face. Real tears this time. Tears of terror. It's a miracle. The doctor said it was impossible, but miracles happen. We prayed, remember? We wanted this so bad. A miracle, Preston repeated. He looked at the medical file, then back at her. 14 years of zero motility, and suddenly, a miracle. Yes, yes, Bianca nodded frantically. Don't let her poison you against me. She wants to destroy our family. Preston, I cut in. My voice was calm, the voice of a judge delivering a verdict. There are no miracles here, only biology and lies. If I am sterile, Preston asked, his voice cracking, staring at his wife's swollen stomach. Then who is the father? Bianca sobbed louder. It's yours. I swear it's yours. Maybe the test was wrong. Maybe you healed. The test was not wrong, I said, and he did not heal. But you are right about one thing. Bianca, someone is the father, someone very close to this family. Shut up, Bianca shrieked at me. Shut up, you bitch! I reached into my bag for the final time. I pulled out the envelope of photographs Mark had sent me. I didn't slide them this time. I stood up and fanned them out on the table like a winning poker hand. Let's look at the family album, I said. The first photo showed Bianca entering the hotel. The second showed her at the dinner table, laughing, her hand touching a man's arm. The third showed the kiss, the intimate, undeniable, passionate kiss in the back of the taxi. Preston looked down. He didn't need to pick them up. The images were large enough. He saw his wife, and he saw the man. He saw the man sitting 3 feet away from him. Preston turned his head slowly to the right. He looked at Arthur Penhaligon. Arthur was frozen. The arrogant smirk was gone, wiped clean off his face. He looked like a man who had just realized he was standing on a landmine that had already clicked. He started to push his chair back, his hands raising in a defensive posture. Preston, wait, Arthur said, his voice high and thin. It's not. Context is important here. We were discussing legal matters. It was a moment of weakness. It meant nothing. A moment of weakness? Preston asked. He looked at Bianca's stomach. That looks like 9 months of weakness to me. Conrad was staring at the photos. He wasn't looking at Bianca. He was looking at Arthur, his fixer, his confidant, the man who knew where every skeleton was buried because he held the shovel. Arthur? Conrad whispered. The betrayal in his voice was absolute. You? Conrad. Listen, Arthur stammered, turning to his boss, sweat beading on his forehead. She came to me. She was lonely. You know how Preston is. He's weak. She needed a real man. I was doing it for the legacy. We needed an heir. I was going to secure the trust. It was the wrong thing to say. You slept with my wife? Preston said. The words came out as a growl. I secured the asset, Arthur yelled, panic taking over. This baby is the only way the trust unlocks. I did you a favor. You impotent little... Preston moved. I had never seen Preston move fast in my life. He was a man of slow, deliberate hesitation. But in that moment, the years of repression, of being called weak, of being disappointed, boiled over into a volcanic eruption of violence. He launched himself across the gap between the chairs. He didn't throw a punch. He tackled Arthur, taking him down to the floor with a crash of expensive wood and bone. You bastard! Preston screamed, his hands finding Arthur's throat. You touched her! You touched my wife! Get off me! Arthur gagged, clawing at Preston's face. The library descended into chaos. The tables shook as they rolled into the legs. Crystal glasses shattered on the floor. Stop it! Stop it! Bianca screamed, standing up and backing away, clutching her stomach. You're going to hurt the baby. It's not his baby, I yelled over the noise, standing my ground. It's Arthur's bastard. Conrad stood up, his face a mask of shock. Arthur, you traitor. You seduced her in my house? Under my nose? She seduced me, Arthur choked out, flailing as Preston slammed his head against the floorboards. Stop them, Bianca wailed. Conrad, do something. But Conrad didn't move. He looked at the scene, his son strangling his lawyer, his daughter-in-law exposed as an adulteress, his heir revealed as a fraud, and he seemed to age 20 years in 20 seconds. He slumped back into his chair, clutching his chest, and then a soft thud. We all frozen. Eleanor had slipped from her chair. She lay on the Persian rug, a heap of gray silk. She had fainted dead away, overwhelmed by the sheer volume of truth that had just flooded the room. Mom! Preston yelled, letting go of Arthur and scrambling toward his mother. Arthur scrambled backward, crab-walking away from Preston, gasping for air, his tie torn, his face scratching and bleeding. He looked at Conrad for help, but Conrad was staring at the wall, catatonic. Preston patted Eleanor's cheeks. Mom! Mom! She groaned, her eyelids fluttering. She was alive, just overwhelmed. Bianca was sobbing hysterically now, a jagged, ugly sound. It wasn't supposed to be like this. We were going to be a family. We were going to be happy. Happy? Preston looked up from his mother, his face streaked with tears and Arthur's blood. He looked at Bianca with pure revulsion. Get out. Preston, please. Get out, Preston roared. Take your bastard and get out of this house. If I see you again, I will kill you. I swear to God. Bianca flinched. She looked at Conrad, but the patriarch was broken. She looked at Arthur, who was cowering in the corner wiping blood from his lip. She realized she had no allies left. Her gamble had failed. The house of cards had not just fallen, it had caught fire. She turned and ran. We heard her heels clattering down the hallway, then the heavy slam of the front door. Arthur stood up shakily. He adjusted his torn suit. He looked at me. There was hatred in his eyes, but also fear. He knew I held the keys to his disbarment. I'll see myself out, Arthur muttered. You do that, I said coldly. And Arthur, I'm sending copies of those photos to the Bar Association in the morning. along with the fraudulent lawsuit you drafted. Arthur blanched. He didn't say a word. He just fled, leaving his briefcase and his dignity behind. The room fell silent again, but it was a different kind of silence. It was the silence of a battlefield after the artillery had stopped. Preston sat on the floor, holding his mother's hand as she wept softly. He looked up at me. His eyes were empty. The anger was gone, replaced by a hollow, crushing grief. He had lost his father, his wife, his unborn child, and his self-respect in the span of 10 minutes. "Are you happy?" Preston asked me. His voice was cracked. "Is this what you wanted?" I looked at him. I felt a twinge of pity, but I crushed it. Pity was a luxury I couldn't afford. Not yet. "I didn't want any of this, Preston," I said. "I just wanted to be left alone. I wanted to mourn my husband in the home we built, but you came for me. You all came for me." I turned my gaze to Conrad. He was still sitting in his high-backed chair at the head of the table. He looked small. The great Conrad Sterling, the titan of industry, was just an old man in a velvet jacket sitting in the wreckage of his own hubris. His empire was shattered. His family was destroyed. He looked up at me. His eyes were dull. "You win," Conrad whispered. "Take the house. Take the money. Just go." He thought it was over. He thought I had played my ace. He thought the destruction of his family was the price I had extracted. I stood up slowly. I smoothed the skirt of my red dress. I picked up my leather bag. "Oh, Conrad," I said, shaking my head. "You misunderstand. This was just the warm-up." Conrad frowned. "What?" "We have settled the issue of the house," I said, walking slowly toward him until I was standing right beside his chair. "And we have settled the issue of the heir." I leaned down, whispering into his ear, just loud enough for Preston and Eleanor to hear. "But we haven't talked about the boat yet. We haven't talked about the boiler." Conrad stiffened. His eyes snapped to mine, wide with terror. "And we haven't talked about the money laundering operation you are running through the Sterling Hope Foundation," I continued. "Or the audit logs that Mia saved on a USB drive before she died. The logs you thought went down with the ship." I pulled the USB drive from my bag. I held it up in the light. It glinted like a silver bullet. "I am not done, Conrad," I said. "I am just getting started." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Conrad Sterling stared at the silver USB drive in my hand as if it were a detonator. In many ways, it was. The folder about Preston had destroyed his family. But this drive? This drive was going to destroy his world. "Give that to me," Conrad rasped. He stood up, his legs shaking. He was no longer the imposing CEO. He was a desperate old man, cornered in his own castle. "You have no idea what is on that drive. Taylor, you are playing with forces you do not understand." "I understand perfectly," I said, my voice calm, contrasting sharply with the chaotic energy of the room. "I understand that the Sterling Hope Foundation is a shell company. I understand that you have been funneling maintenance budgets into offshore accounts in Panama and the Caymans for 5 years. I understand that you saved $3 million on fleet repairs in 2025, and that savings cost 12 people their lives." I took a step closer to him. "Mia figured it out," I whispered. "She was an accountant. Conrad, a brilliant one. You thought she was just a flighty artist. But she saw the patterns. She downloaded the ledgers. She scanned the invoices. She built a case against you that is so airtight. Not even Arthur Penhaligon could plead you out of it." "Mia is dead," Conrad said, his voice trembling with a mix of grief and rage. "She died in the accident." "She died because of the accident you caused," I corrected him. "And this is her testimony." Conrad lunged. It was a clumsy, desperate move. He threw himself across the corner of the table, his hand clawing for the drive. But I was younger, faster, and fueled by a year of suppressed rage. I stepped back, and he crashed onto the polished wood, knocking over the pitcher of water. "It is useless, Conrad," I said, watching him scramble to regain his dignity. "You can take the drive. You can smash it. You can swallow it for all I care. It doesn't matter anymore. He looked up, panting, his hair disheveled. What do you mean? I checked my watch. It was a simple silver timepiece. It is now 7:15, I said. At 7 o'clock, exactly 15 minutes ago, a scheduled email was triggered from a secure server. I set it up 3 days ago, just in case something happened to me before I got here. I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. That email contained the entire contents of this drive, I explained. It was sent to the Boston field office of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. A carbon copy was sent to the Criminal Investigation Division of the Internal Revenue Service, and just for good measure, I blind copied an investigative journalist at the New York Times. Conrad went white. It wasn't the pale white of fear. It was the gray, translucent color of death. He slumped against the table, his eyes losing focus. You destroyed me, he whispered. The company, the shareholders, my legacy. Your legacy is a lie, I said. Your legacy is built on the corpses of your children and the fraud of your accounts. Why? He moaned, looking at me with wet, pleading eyes. You could have asked for money. I would have given you millions. Why burn it all down? Because you touched her room, I said. The answer seemed to confuse him. He blinked. The room? He asked. You broke into my house, I said, my voice dropping to a growl. You kicked in the door of the sanctuary I kept for Mia. You let strangers touch her things. You broke the painting she made for Liam. You disrespected their memory. You thought you could erase them to make room for your fake heir. You thought my grief was weakness. I leaned down, bringing my face inches from his. You should have left the room alone. Conrad, you should have left me alone. That was when the sound started. At first, it was just a faint wail in the distance, carried on the wind from the highway. But then it grew louder, piercing, the distinct, rhythmic yelp of emergency sirens. Not one, not two, a swarm. Conrad turned his head toward the window. Blue and red lights began to flash against the library curtains, strobing like a disco ball in hell. You called them, Conrad whispered. I called them before I walked through your front door. I confirmed. I told them I had credible evidence of a fugitive risk regarding a massive financial fraud case. I told them you were planning to flee the country tonight. I wasn't. They don't know that. I shrugged. The front door of the mansion crashed open. We heard heavy boots on the marble floor. We heard shouting. Federal agents, nobody moves. Police, stay where you are. Henderson, the butler, was shouting something in protest, but he was drowned out by the chaos. Preston was still sitting on the floor, holding his mother. He didn't even look up as the noise approached. He was catatonic, lost in the wreckage of his own life. Eleanor was sobbing into his shoulder. The library doors burst open. Half a dozen agents in windbreakers emblazoned with FBI stormed into the room, guns drawn. Uniformed police officers followed them. Conrad Sterling, an agent shouted. Hands where I can see them. Conrad didn't fight. He stood up slowly, raising his hands in surrender. He looked small. He looked defeated. He looked exactly like what he was, a criminal caught in the act. Taylor Valen? A female agent asked, lowering her weapon as she scanned the room. That is me, I said, holding up the USB drive. I believe this is the evidence you are looking for. She walked over and took the drive, bagging it instantly. Thank you, ma'am. We received the data transmission. It is substantial. I watched as they approached Conrad. They spun him around. I heard the metallic click of handcuffs ratcheting tight around his wrists. The sound was more satisfying than any symphony I had ever heard. You have the right to remain silent, the officer recited. Conrad looked at me over his shoulder as they marched him out. There was no hatred left in his eyes, only a vast, empty shock. He had spent his life building walls to keep people out, and now he was going to spend the rest of it staring at walls that kept him in. I picked up my leather bag. I looked at Preston one last time. I am sorry, Preston, I said. I truly am, but you needed to wake up. He didn't answer. He just rocked back and forth, holding his mother. 2 orphans in a castle that was about to be seized by the government. I walked out of the library. The hallway was filled with officers. As I stepped out onto the front porch, the cool night air hit my face. The driveway was a sea of flashing lights. There were at least 10 cruisers, 2 unmarked vans, and an ambulance. And there, near the main gate, was a scene of frantic resistance. Bianca. She hadn't made it far. A patrol car had blocked the exit, cutting off her escape route. 2 officers were escorting her back toward the house. She was screaming, flailing, kicking at them with her expensive heels. "I didn't do anything," she shrieked. "I am a victim. I am pregnant. Let me go." She saw me standing on the porch, bathed in the red glow of the taillights. She stopped struggling for a second. "You," she screamed, her face twisted into a mask of ugly hatred. "You ruined everything, you jealous witch. I hope you rot." I didn't say a word. I just watched. I watched as the officers pushed her into the back of a squad car for questioning. She wasn't an innocent bystander. She was an accomplice to Arthur's fraud. And likely, once the forensic accountants were done, they would find her name on some of those offshore accounts too. Arthur Penhaligon was nowhere to be seen, but I knew he wouldn't get far. The Bar Association and the FBI would be knocking on his door before sunrise. I walked down the steps, past the handcuffed Conrad being shoved into a federal vehicle. I walked past the screaming Bianca. I walked past the wreckage of the Sterling dynasty. My driver was still waiting. He had moved the car to the side to let the police pass, but he hadn't left. He was staring at the scene with wide eyes. "Mrs. Vallon?" he asked as I opened the back door. Are you okay?" I sat down on the leather seat. I smoothed the red silk of my dress. My hands were finally steady. "I am fine," I said. "Take me home, please." The drive back was quiet. The storm had passed. The heavy clouds had broken, revealing a sliver of moon hanging over the Atlantic. The city lights of Boston twinkled in the distance, indifferent to the drama that had just unfolded on the cliffs. When we pulled into my driveway, the house was dark. My SUV was still sitting on its flat tires, a reminder of the threats that could no longer hurt me. I paid the driver and tipped him generously. I unlocked my front door and stepped inside. The silence of the house was different now. It wasn't the heavy, oppressive silence of grief. It was the peaceful silence of safety. The siege was over. The enemy had been routed. I kicked off my heels in the hallway. I walked barefoot up the stairs. I went straight to Mia's room. I turned on the soft lamp in the corner. I picked up the easel that the movers had knocked over. I set it upright. I picked up the broken frame of the painting. The canvas was torn. Liam's face split down the middle, but I placed it gently on the table. I went to the closet and pulled out a roll of canvas tape. I carefully, tenderly, taped the back of the painting, bringing the torn edges together. It wasn't perfect. The scar would always be there, but it was whole again. I reached into the drawer and took out a vanilla-scented candle. I lit it with a match. The flame flickered, casting long shadows on the walls that were still mine, the walls that no one would ever take away from me. I went downstairs to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of red wine. I walked into the living room and sat in the bay window, looking out at the dark ocean. My phone buzzed on the cushion beside me. It was a notification from my bank app. Security alert resolved. 2-factor authentication enabled. Your assets are secure. Then, a news alert popped up. Breaking news, FBI raids Sterling estate. Shipping magnate Conrad Sterling arrested in a $100 million fraud scheme. I swiped the notification away. I didn't need to read it. I had written the story. I took a sip of wine. It tasted rich, complex, like the end of a long, hard winter. I looked out at the waves crashing against the shore. The same waves that had taken them from me. But tonight, I didn't feel the crushing weight of their absence. I felt their presence. I felt Liam's hand on my shoulder. I felt Mia's laugh in the room. I had fought for them. I had protected their names. I had saved their home. "Everything is done," I whispered to the empty room, raising my glass to the moon. "The house is safe. The truth is out. You can rest now. I took another sip, the warmth spreading through my chest.
Good night, Mia. Good night, Liam.
I closed my eyes, and for the first time in 365 days, I breathed. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I poured my heart into every word, and I truly hope you felt the journey of Taylor Vallon as she fought for justice. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please leave a comment below telling me your city or country. It is always amazing to see how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this revenge drama, please consider subscribing to the channel Scarlet Revenge Stories. Hit that like button and smash the hype button to help this story get recommended to more people. Your support means the world to me and helps me keep bringing you these emotional, realistic stories. Until next time, stay strong.